In the burning summer of 1851, whispers crawled through the piney woods of eastern Texas. They spoke of a man bought and sold like cattle, yet every master who claimed him met the same chilling fate. No blade, no poison, no trace, just death, swift, silent, and impossible to explain. His name was Samuel Kincaid, but folks would come to call him something far more haunting, the Widowmaker. Part 1. The First Death. The year was 1850, and the town of Marshall, Texas, pulsed with the kind of wealth that only cotton and cruelty could buy. The air smelled of sweet magnolia and sweat, the courthouse bell marking time over a system built on human chains. On auction days, the square filled with voices shouting bids and prices, as if souls could be measured in dollars. That spring, Thomas Caffrey rode into Marshall with $600 in his saddlebag and the cold precision of a man who turned life and death into mathematics. He wasn't a monster by the standards of his time, just another plantation owner who believed discipline and profit were one and the same. He'd lost his wife 2 years earlier, leaving behind a daughter, Catherine, and a house echoing with quiet grief. Caffrey came to town that April morning looking to buy 2 new field hands. The cotton season was coming fast, and debts from a bad harvest pressed at his books like vultures. Behind the courthouse, a wooden platform served as the auction block. The smell of dust and sweat hung heavy as buyers inspected the merchandise, strong backs, scarred skin, frightened eyes. Lot number 7 stepped forward. Male Negro, approximately 28, the auctioneer barked. Field trained, no marks, no defects. The name on the paper read Samuel Kincaid. He stood still as stone, eyes downcast, his expression unreadable. What no one said aloud, what no one could, was that Samuel had already outlived 4 owners. Each one had died within weeks of purchasing him, every death written in county ledgers with the same phrase, sudden failure of constitution. Caffrey paid $420 and took Samuel home. It was a simple transaction. A signature. A handshake. A fate sealed. The wagon rattled along dirt roads through the pines, sunlight slicing through the branches like knives. Caffrey gave brief instructions, work hours, rations, the overseer's authority. Samuel nodded, saying little. He studied everything, the fences, the cabins, the distance between the quarters and the main house. He noticed where power lived and where it pretended to. By sunrise, he was in the fields. To the overseer, Wallace Pruitt, Samuel was steady but unremarkable. He didn't talk much, didn't complain, didn't rebel, just worked. But among the enslaved, eyes watched him differently. They saw a man who asked quiet questions, about who was trusted, who was punished, what made the master weak. Over the next weeks, Samuel learned the rhythms of the plantation. He learned that Thomas Caffrey suffered terrible headaches, treated with laudanum mixed by his daughter, Catherine. He learned that the plantation was deep in debt, that creditors hovered close, and that one more bad harvest could ruin them. He also learned patience. Then came the night of June 2, 1850. The air hung thick and still. Caffrey went to bed early, grumbling about another headache. Catherine brought him his usual laudanum dose, same medicine, same glass, same routine. He drank it, thanked her faintly, and turned away to sleep. By morning, the master of the Caffrey plantation was dead. Catherine found him cold and pale in his bed, eyes half open, as if caught between a dream and something darker. Her scream echoed through the house. Within hours, drive, Ambrose Whitfield arrived, notebook in hand, performing an examination that sounded official but explained. Nothing. No wounds. No poison odor. No struggle, he wrote. Peaceful aspect, likely natural failure of constitution. Natural. That was the word folks used when they couldn't find a reason. Within a week, the plantation fell into chaos. Catherine, just 19, was left in charge, but the law said she couldn't manage business. Creditors swarmed. The overseer ran the fields, but the money dried up fast. And in August, the estate went to auction. Everything, land, tools, furniture, and 32 human lives, sold off to pay debts. Samuel stood on that platform again, silent as before. He'd been on the Caffrey plantation exactly 11 weeks. His new master was Robert Chandler, a man with sharper suits and colder eyes. Chandler ran one of the largest plantations in the county, 800 acres, 67 enslaved people, and a belief that God himself approved his wealth. He called his methods rational management, with punishments scheduled like chores and every mouth measured in profit. Samuel's price dropped to $380. Chandler didn't care about history, he cared about bargains. At Chandler's place, order ruled like iron. Work began at dawn and ended only when darkness erased the fields. Samuel labored quietly, learned the new system, and began asking his questions again. He learned that Chandler suffered stomach troubles, chronic pain that he treated with calomel, a mercury-based medicine prescribed by the same drive. Whitfield, who declared Caffrey's death natural. He learned that Chandler prided himself on inspecting the slave quarters himself every Sunday after church, his own private ritual of power. And he learned how habits could kill a man. On the evening of September 28, 1850, Robert Chandler complained of sharp pain after dinner. His wife fetched his medicine, the same white powder she'd mixed 100 times before. He swallowed it, muttered a prayer, and sat down at his desk to review his ledgers. Hours later, she found him slumped over his papers, the ink still wet, his skin gray as candle ash. When Dr. Whitfield examined him, he frowned. Liver failure, he muttered, though even he seemed uncertain. Likely related to his digestive troubles. He wrote another note in his journal. Another, sudden failure of constitution. Another name crossed off the ledgers of the living. And once again, Samuel Kincaid was sold. No one in Harrison County dared whisper what some already suspected, that this man carried something with him from plantation to plantation. Not a disease, not a curse, something older, deeper, and far more deliberate. The story of the Widowmaker had only just begun. End of part 1, to be continued. Would you like me to continue with part 2, The Second Death, in the same tone, horror blended with historical realism, simple American storytelling, 1,000 words each? Title: The Widowmaker of Texas, Part 2, The Holy Man Falls. By the time the third man died, the whispers had already started. A name passed in secret between slave quarters and river docks, between fields and midnight fires. The name was Samuel Kincaid, the man who could not be owned. Every master who claimed him soon met the same fate, sudden, silent death. Some said it was God's justice. Others said it was something darker. Part 2, The Holy Man Falls. Robert Chandler's funeral filled the Baptist church to its doors. He'd been a respected man, a deacon, a husband, a father, and now another soul buried under the phrase failure of constitution. The doctor said it was his stomach. The preacher said it was God's timing. But the enslaved people in Harrison County said something else. They said the man called Samuel carried death with him. 6 weeks later, the Chandler estate went to auction, and there Samuel stood again, silent. Still, his expression calm as ever. Buyers studied him, noting his strength, his composure, his eyes that seemed to see everything. And though no one said it out loud, every man in that crowd had heard the rumors. Yet greed and pride always shouted louder than fear. That's when Daniel Hartford stepped forward. Hartford was a North Carolina man, tall, clean-shaven, and proud of both his faith and his fortune. He'd built his plantation in Texas with Christian principles, or so he claimed. He quoted scripture when he gave orders. He held Sunday prayers for his slaves, believing that God smiled on those who managed others righteously. He called his plantation a model of mercy, but the people under his control called it what it was, a gilded cage. When he heard the whispers about Samuel's previous masters, Hartford only chuckled. If those men died, he said, it was the Lord's will. Not the devil's work. A Christian fears no curse. He bought Samuel for $350 that November, a price lower than the others but still enough to make it feel like a bargain. And just like that, Samuel Kincaid was bound to another man, though no chain could truly hold him. The Hartford plantation stretched across 1,000 acres, a living monument to cotton and contradiction. Hartford preached kindness but practiced cruelty through delegation. He wouldn't raise a whip himself, but his overseer did it in his name. He said families should stay together, unless debts required otherwise. He said God loved all men, but not equally. Samuel was assigned to work at the cotton gin, a sprawling wooden structure filled with dust, noise, and danger. It wasn't fieldwork, it required precision, rhythm, and trust. The job gave him something else too, proximity. The gin was where business met blood. Hartford himself spent 3 days a week there, overseeing operations, inspecting ledgers, and greeting local farmers who came to have their crops processed. Samuel listened to every word. He memorized the movements, the conversations, the habits. Hartford's piety was predictable. He rose at dawn, prayed before meals, inspected the fields in the afternoon, and retired early to his study. His meals were prepared by Rachel, the kitchen woman who'd been in that house for 12 years. She was sharp, quiet, and careful. She'd seen too much to be surprised by anything, until Samuel started asking her questions. "How much coffee does Mr. Hartford take?" he asked one morning. "2 spoonfuls, Rachel replied cautiously. "He ever get sick from his meals?" "Never that I've seen." "You ever use herbs for his medicine?" "Sometimes," she said slowly, watching him. "Why?" Samuel only smiled. Curiosity. He started volunteering to help in the kitchen garden, tending to mint, sage, and other plants. Rachel saw him watching which leaves went into medicine jars and which went into the cooking pots. She said nothing, but she remembered. Winter came early that year, with a chill that settled in the bones. On the morning of January 7, 1851, Daniel Hartford woke to the sound of roosters and the smell of frying ham. Rachel served his usual breakfast: eggs, grits, coffee. He said grace, ate heartily, and left for his office near the gin. It was an ordinary day. Hartford reviewed his accounts, met a farmer about a loan, then walked the fields with his overseer. He spoke about God, about profit, about how righteousness and wealth were signs of divine favor. Around 3 in the afternoon, as he was discussing cotton shipments, his words caught in his throat. Witnesses later said he gasped, stumbled, and clutched his chest. His face flushed red, then darkened to a deep purple. The overseer shouted for help, thinking the man was choking. Within minutes, Hartford lay motionless in the dirt, eyes wide, lips blue. By the time they carried him to the house, he was gone. Dr. Ambrose Whitfield arrived at sunset, his journal tucked under his arm. He'd seen this scene before, too many times, too close together. He examined Hartford's body and frowned. No wounds, no signs of poison, just the same, strange stillness. The same story, told in 3 different homes. "Acute respiratory failure," he murmured, scribbling in his notes. "Possibly cardiac in origin," but his expression betrayed uncertainty. 3 masters, 8 months, all dead, all healthy before, all connected by one name in the bills of sale. He didn't write that part. He never did. The funeral was grand, with half the county attending. The preacher thundered about God's mysterious will, while Mrs. Hartford sobbed behind her veil. Among the enslaved, Rachel stood silent. Her eyes met Samuel's across the crowd for a moment, just long enough to see that he wasn't mourning. The Hartford plantation was soon dissolved, the debts too heavy for the widow to manage. And once again, Samuel Kincaid found himself back at the courthouse steps, waiting to be sold. By now, he was a story told in whispers and warnings. Don't buy that man. He carries the shadow with him. Don't look him in the eye too long. Don't call him by name after dark. Yet there was always another buyer. Always another man who thought he could master what others could not. Samuel's eyes lifted once as the auctioneer shouted his name. He looked toward the crowd of planters and merchants, his gaze calm, almost kind. To them, he was property. To history, he was becoming something else entirely. The widowmaker of Texas had claimed his third soul. And somewhere deep in the pine woods, the rumor turned into a legend. End of part 2. To be continued. Would you like me to write part 3, The Pious Man's Secret, next, keeping the same eerie storytelling tone, historical realism, and YouTube-optimized narrative flow, about 1,000 words? Hook. They said death had a name, and it was Samuel Kincaid. Every man who bought him met the same fate: sudden, unexplained death. No wounds. No poison. Just a quiet evening that turned into a nightmare no one could understand. By 1851, whispers spread through the plantations like wildfire. Samuel wasn't just a man. He was a curse. And the South trembled every time his name was spoken. Part 3. The Curse of Samuel Kincaid. The Texas heat was heavy that February morning when James Whitlock took possession of Samuel Kincaid. Whitlock wasn't the kind of man who believed in superstition or stories told in the slave quarters after dark. He believed in structure, in logic, in discipline. He'd spent years studying military tactics and order, things that could be measured and explained. So when he heard the tales about the slave whose masters kept dying, he didn't flinch. He was curious. He wanted to prove that men died because of weakness or carelessness, not curses or ghosts. Whitlock wanted answers, and Samuel was the riddle. The plantation he ran was no place for chaos. Every tool, every crop, every person had their number, their place, their duty. He called it strict observation, but the people under him called it living in a cage. Whitlock believed control was the key to life, and now, that control would be tested. Samuel Kincaid arrived silent and tired. He didn't look dangerous. He wasn't tall or loud or defiant. He just worked. The other slaves avoided him, whispering his name when they thought no one was listening. They'd heard what happened to Caffrey, Chandler, and Hartford. Each had died suddenly, their bodies writhing or gasping for breath. No blade, no bullet, just gone. But Whitlock wasn't afraid. He was ready. He gave Samuel his own small cabin, away from everyone else. Food delivered separately. A guard posted outside his door every night. The man was watched from dawn till dusk, no chance to cause harm, no moment unaccounted for. Whitlock even talked to him daily, testing his words for lies. 3 men dead, Whitlock said one morning, his eyes sharp as razors. Some might call that a pattern. Samuel's gaze stayed on the dirt. Don't know nothing about that, master. Just worked where I was told. Whitlock stepped closer, voice low. I think you're either the unluckiest slave in Texas, or the most dangerous. Samuel didn't flinch. Just trying to do my work, master. Don't want no trouble. Whitlock smiled thinly. Good. Because I'll be watching you. Every hour. If anything happens to me, there won't be a trial. They'll hang you from the nearest tree. Samuel nodded once. Yes, master. That was how it began. 11 weeks of silent war. Samuel never broke a rule. He worked hard, kept his head down, spoke only when spoken to. But while Whitlock tried to control Samuel, something else began to control Whitlock. The first sign was his sleep. He started waking up in the middle of the night, certain someone was standing outside his window. His wife said she saw no one, but he insisted he'd heard footsteps. Then came the whispers, low, strange sounds drifting through the hallways at night. He accused servants of sneaking around, searching for proof that Samuel was behind it all, but nothing ever turned up. Days turned into weeks, and Whitlock grew jumpy, nervous, paranoid. His overseers noticed he no longer trusted his own men. He checked the locks on his doors 5, 6 times before bed. He'd sit at dinner staring at his food, then push the plate away untouched. His wife begged him to rest. James, please, she said one night, you're scaring the children. Whitlock rubbed his temples, sweat shining on his forehead. You don't understand. He's doing something. I can feel it. He's waiting. Who? She whispered. Samuel, he said. He's watching me like I'm the one in the cage. By April, the plantation had fallen quiet. Workers moved slower, fearful of the tension in the air. Everyone could feel something coming, like a storm building far away. Whitlock finally dismissed his food taster, deciding it made him look foolish, and that night he sat down to dinner with his family. He ate sparingly, then retired to his study. 2 hours later, a crash echoed through the house. His wife rushed in to find him on the floor, convulsing violently. Foam spilled from his mouth as his limbs twisted unnaturally. By the time the doctor arrived, Whitlock was gone. No poison, no sign of disease, just another death without explanation. Dr. Whitfield's journal from that night was grim. This cannot be coincidence. Something unnatural is happening. Samuel Kincaid remains alive and well, and I cannot find the cause. If I accuse him without proof, I ruin my name. Yet if I say nothing, I become part of whatever this is. And so the cycle continued. The Whitlock estate was sold, and Samuel along with it. But now the whispers had spread far beyond the county. Among the enslaved, Samuel was no longer just a man, he was a legend. A spirit of vengeance in flesh. They said he could kill a master without lifting a hand, that his very presence brought death. The next man to buy him, George Pruitt, laughed off the rumors. He needed cheap labor and thought the story was nonsense. He lasted 6 weeks. The doctor called it sudden pneumonia. No warning, no cure. Then came Nathan Cross, who paid $90 for Samuel. He died in 3 weeks, paralyzed from head to toe, unable to speak or breathe before the end. And when William Stokes bought Samuel for $65, the cheapest sale yet, people whispered that Stokes had just paid for his own grave. But Stokes would prove different. He would live long enough to look Samuel Kincaid in the eye and ask the question that haunted every man before him. Who are you, really? The story of Samuel Kincaid was far from over. End of part 3. Call to action. If this tale of mystery and death gave you chills, hit that like button, share it with a friend who loves dark history, and subscribe for part 4, where William Stokes dares to uncover the truth behind the curse of Samuel Kincaid. Would you like me to continue with part 4, next 1000 words, in the same style and tone? Hook. They said 7 men tried to own him, and each one met the same fate. Now, the final master, William Stokes, believed he could break the curse. But Samuel Kincaid wasn't just a man. He was the whisper behind every closed door, the silence that came before death. And in the spring of 1852, that silence settled over Stokes' plantation like a warning from the grave. Part 4. The Man Who Would Not Die. William Stokes didn't believe in curses. He was a businessman, not a fool chasing ghost stories. When he bought Samuel Kincaid for $65, he saw only opportunity, a strong man at a cheap price. Other buyers had been too afraid, but Stokes saw that as weakness. He'd heard the rumors, yes, but he believed fear was the only poison here. You work, I pay, Stokes said on the day Samuel arrived. You do your job, and there'll be no trouble. Understand? Samuel nodded, quiet and steady. Yes, master. The sun burned low that evening, casting long shadows across the cotton fields. The workers watched from a distance as Samuel was led to a small cabin near the edge of the property. Nobody wanted to speak his name too loud. It was said that to talk about him after dark invited his curse. At first, things seemed normal. Samuel worked hard, kept to himself, and never argued. Stokes often watched him from the porch, curious. There was something strange about the man. Something calm, too calm, like he carried a secret that nobody else could bear. 3 weeks passed. Then strange things began. The dogs stopped barking. One morning they were found lying silent, breathing shallow, eyes wide open as if they'd seen something that froze their souls. The animals recovered after 2 days, but they never went near Samuel's cabin again. Stokes' overseer, a man named Dillard, started complaining about headaches and nausea. He said he felt watched, even when he was alone. That man's got eyes that follow you, even when you ain't looking, he said. Stokes laughed it off, but he couldn't ignore the unease that spread through the quarters. Every night, workers whispered that Samuel didn't sleep. Some said they saw him sitting outside, staring at the moon for hours. Others claimed they heard him talking softly to no one, words they couldn't understand. One night, Stokes decided to see for himself. He crept toward Samuel's cabin under the cover of darkness, his boots crunching lightly on dry soil. Inside, a candle burned low. Samuel sat on the floor, eyes closed, whispering. His hands were folded in front of him, but the words were not prayers. They sounded older, deeper, like something not meant for human tongues. Stokes froze, the hair rising on his arms. Then Samuel's eyes opened, and he turned toward the window. His gaze met Stokes's through the glass. You shouldn't be here, master, he said softly. Stokes stumbled back, startled. What did you say? You shouldn't watch things you don't understand, Samuel answered. Then he blew out the candle, and the cabin went dark. The next morning, Dillard didn't show up for work. They found him dead in his bed, his face twisted as if he'd died in terror. There were no marks, no sign of struggle. The doctor said his heart had simply stopped. Stokes began to worry. He ordered Samuel's cabin searched, but nothing unusual was found. No poison, no weapons, no charms or strange objects. Yet everyone could feel it. The air around Samuel seemed heavier, colder. By the second month, the plantation felt haunted. Tools broke without reason. Crops withered in patches that formed shapes no one could explain. Servants whispered that at night they saw shadows moving near the well, though no one was there. Stokes tried to hold the plantation together, telling himself it was coincidence. He told his wife, Clara, not to listen to the stories. But at night, he couldn't sleep. He heard footsteps outside their window, slow and steady, circling the house. When he opened the door, nothing was there. One night, Clara woke screaming. She said she'd seen a figure standing in the corner of their room, a man with eyes like burning coal. Stokes checked every corner of the house, every hallway, but found nothing. Still, he noticed that the air smelled faintly of smoke, though no candle was lit. The next day, Stokes called Samuel to his office. The two men faced each other across the desk. "I've buried 3 dogs, 2 workers, and an overseer since you got here," Stokes said. "Now my wife says she sees ghosts. Tell me the truth. What are you?" Samuel met his gaze calmly. "Just a man, master." "No," Stokes said, voice shaking. "You're not just a man. I've seen death before, and it don't walk upright. It don't talk back." Samuel's expression didn't change. Maybe death's just tired of waiting. Stokes slammed his fist on the desk. "Enough. You'll answer me plain, or I'll have you whipped." Samuel rose slowly. "You can't kill what ain't alive, master. I told you, I just work where I'm told." Something in his voice sent a chill down Stokes's spine. It wasn't anger. It was truth. Cold, empty truth. That night, Stokes packed his bags. He told Clara they were leaving for Galveston at first light. But before dawn, she found him in his study, slumped over his desk, the ink still wet on his unfinished letter. His face was pale, his eyes open, his mouth frozen mid-word. The doctor said it looked like a stroke, though Stokes was only 38 and in perfect health. Samuel was sold the next week, though this time, nobody wanted him. His reputation had grown beyond fear, it was legend. Across Texas, people began to call him the man who couldn't be owned. Every plantation owner who heard his name knew what it meant: buy him, and you die. But Samuel Kincaid's story wasn't over yet. For the first time, a group of men would decide that enough was enough. They would not sell him again. They would destroy him, and that decision would unleash something darker than death itself. End of Part 4. Call to action. If this story made your heart race, hit like, share with someone who loves Southern Gothic horror, and subscribe for Part 5, where the curse of Samuel Kincaid takes a terrifying new turn, and death stops waiting in silence. Would you like me to continue with Part 5 next? Same tone, 1,000 words, horror historic YouTube style. Hook. The story of Samuel Kincaid had spread like wildfire across the Texas frontier. 7 masters dead, 7 funerals, 7 unexplained endings. No one wanted to buy him now, not even for free. But the white men who ran the county couldn't let the story end there. They believed they were the masters of life and death. What they didn't know was that death had already chosen its side. Part 5. The Gathering at Pine Hollow. By the summer of 1852, every plantation owner in Harrison County knew the name Samuel Kincaid. The name carried weight, like a curse whispered in the dark. Men who prided themselves on being rational began to cross themselves when they heard it. Women warned their husbands not to speak it at night. Even the enslaved refused to say it aloud, calling him only the shadow man. But there were some men who thought the curse was nothing more than superstition. They were rich, proud, and terrified of losing control. They gathered one humid July night at the Pine Hollow courthouse to discuss what to do. There were 9 of them, landowners, businessmen, men with influence. They arrived in polished boots and long coats despite the heat, their faces red with anger and fear. At the head of the table sat Judge Amos Greeley, an old man whose voice could silence a crowd. "We have a problem," he said, his eyes scanning the room. This Samuel Kincaid. He's become a story, a ghost that walks among us. I say it's time we put an end to it." One man, Henry Cobb, spat tobacco into a tin cup. "End it how, Judge? You gonna hang a man without proof?" "Proof?" Greeley snapped. "We have 7 graves. You call that nothing? He's a slave," another said quietly. "The law says he can't be tried like a white man. We can't hang him legal." "Then we do it outside the law," Greeley growled. "You think God wants this evil walking free?" And so it was decided. The men formed what they called the Committee of Order. They swore to capture Samuel Kincaid and put him to death, not through sale, not through trial, but by fire. That night, a posse of 12 rode out to the Stokes plantation, where Samuel was still kept under watch. The overseer met them at the gate, his hands trembling. "You men sure you know what you're doing?" he asked. "That one ain't right. You can feel it when he looks at you." "Just bring him out," Greeley ordered. They dragged Samuel from his cabin, still wearing the same worn shirt he'd worked in that day. His face was calm, unreadable. The torchlight flickered across his skin, giving him a strange, ghostly glow. "Samuel Kincaid," Judge Greeley said, "you are accused of witchcraft, murder, and dealings with the devil himself. You've killed 7 good Christian men, and we're here to see justice done." Samuel's eyes moved slowly across the men surrounding him. "You call this justice?" he asked softly. "You bring death wherever you go," Greeley shouted. "Men are afraid to even speak your name." Samuel tilted his head. "Then maybe you should stop saying it." The men laughed nervously, but the sound didn't last long. A wind rose suddenly from the trees, carrying the smell of rain that wasn't there. The horses shifted, stamping the dirt. "Get the rope," Greeley said. "We'll end this now." They tied Samuel's hands and feet, dragged him toward the old oak near the cotton gin, and threw a noose over the thick branch. "Any last words?" Greeley asked. Samuel looked up at him, and for the first time, his calm broke into something darker, a faint smile. "You can't kill what's already been dead a long time, Judge." Greeley hesitated, but pride drove him forward. He gave the signal. The rope tightened. The men waited for struggle, for sound, for something. But Samuel didn't fight. He hung there silent, his eyes open, watching them as the life drained from his body. When it was over, the men stood in uneasy silence. The wind died down. The air was still. "Cut him down," Greeley said finally. "Bury him deep. No marker." They buried him near the tree line, the earth still warm from the torches. By morning, it was done. But the next day, strange things began to happen. The cotton gin caught fire at dawn. No one saw how it started. The flames spread fast, eating through the machinery until nothing remained but twisted metal and ash. By evening, 2 of the men from the committee fell sick. One couldn't breathe. The other began to shake uncontrollably, his body twisting in pain until he begged for mercy that wouldn't come. Both were dead before sunrise. Judge Greeley received the news at breakfast. He pushed his plate away, his hands trembling. "Coincidence," he muttered. "Just coincidence." But deep down, he didn't believe it. That night, he dreamed of Samuel. The man stood at the foot of his bed, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You thought it was over," Samuel whispered. "But death doesn't stop because you say so." Greeley woke screaming. The next morning, his wife found him cold and still, his eyes open wide in terror. By the end of the month, 5 of the 9 men who had signed the committee's oath were dead. The survivors tried to keep quiet, but the story couldn't be contained. It spread from one plantation to the next like smoke through dry grass. They said Samuel Kincaid had been hung under the old oak, but that his grave refused to stay closed. That sometimes, on foggy nights, you could see him standing near the field where he died, his shadow moving though no man stood there. They said if you spoke his name after dark, your breath would turn cold, and your heart would race as if something unseen had begun counting it down. And they said Judge Greeley's grave cracked open a week after his funeral, split clean down the middle like the earth itself had rejected him. No one dared go near the Stokes plantation again. The land lay abandoned, the house rotting, the fields overgrown. Only the old oak tree remained, its branches bare even in spring, its roots thick and twisted like they were feeding on something buried beneath. But one man, a traveling preacher named Reverend Cole, claimed he could cleanse the land. He said faith was stronger than fear. He said he'd drive out the evil that haunted Pine Hollow. He would ride out to the plantation at dusk, Bible in hand. He would not return. End of Part 5. Call to action. If you felt chills running down your spine, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for Part 6, where the preacher's final sermon is heard not by the living, but by the dead. Would you like me to continue with Part 6 next, keeping the same tone and structure, 1,000 words, historic horror, easy language, YouTube style? Hook. Some say the devil hides in the details. Others say he hides in the land. But in Harrison County, Texas, folks whispered that the devil had taken a name, Samuel Kincaid. His masters were gone. The men who hanged him were buried beside him. And when a traveling preacher named Reverend Cole came to cast out the curse, he believed he carried the power of God. What he didn't know was that faith means nothing when death is already listening. Part 6. The Preacher and the Hanging Tree. The Stokes plantation was silent when Reverend Cole arrived at dusk. The house stood in ruin, its shutters hanging loose, its porch sagging under the weight of time and something heavier. The cotton fields had turned wild, and the old oak by the gin looked like a skeleton against the setting sun. Cole was a tall man with a booming voice and steady hands. He'd spent years traveling from town to town, preaching revival and redemption. Folks called him a man of miracles, the kind who could make the sick walk and the sinful weep. When he heard about Samuel Kincaid, the slave who killed with no weapon, the ghost who haunted the living, he called it blasphemy. There's no curse that the Lord can't break, he told the townsfolk gathered outside the church. And no spirit that can stand against the word. They warned him not to go. The judge who ordered the hanging was dead. The men who buried Samuel were dead. The plantation was cursed ground. But Cole only smiled and raised his Bible. The Lord is my shepherd, he said. I fear no evil. He set out alone on horseback as the last light faded behind the trees. The air grew heavy as he rode, thick with the scent of dust and decay. The sound of insects stopped when he passed the old fence line. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. Cole dismounted near the oak and tied his horse to a fence post. The ground beneath the tree was uneven, marked by old roots and what looked like a shallow mound of earth. He knelt beside it, pressing his hand to the soil. It was cold, too cold for a summer night. He opened his Bible and began to read. His voice rang strong at first, echoing through the empty fields. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The wind rose suddenly, cutting his words short. The pages of the Bible flipped on their own, fluttering like wings. Cole steadied them, but the ground beneath him seemed to pulse, just once, like the earth had a heartbeat. He froze. Then, from behind him, a voice said softly, "Why do you disturb the dead, preacher?" Cole turned sharply. No one stood there. The oak's long shadow stretched toward him, and for a moment, it looked like the shape of a man hanging from a rope. "Show yourself," Cole shouted. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you." The wind answered, carrying a faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. He said the same thing once. Cole gripped his cross and stepped forward. "Who are you?" "You know my name," the voice said. The preacher swallowed hard. "Samuel Kincaid." Silence. Then the sound of a footstep in the grass. Cole turned, heart hammering. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, tall, still, and dark as shadow. "I come to release your soul," Cole said, lifting his Bible. "You are bound by sin, but the Lord offers forgiveness if you." The figure stepped closer, and moonlight touched its face. It wasn't a corpse. It wasn't alive either. Its eyes were too empty, too deep, like they saw straight through the preacher and into the space where his faith lived. "You think you can free me?" Samuel asked quietly. "You think I want freedom?" Cole tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "They owned me," Samuel continued. "Sold me, starved me, beat me, prayed over me while they chained me. And when they died, they said it was the Lord's will." He looked up at the tree. Maybe they were right. Maybe God finally listened. This is not God's work, Cole said, his voice shaking. This is evil. Samuel tilted his head. Evil? You think I asked for this? You think I wanted to live this way, half in the ground, half in the dark? The preacher stepped back. His horse whinnied in panic, straining against the rope. In the name of Christ, I banish you. Christ was a man who suffered, Samuel said, his voice low and calm. Tell me, preacher, how many men did you save from chains? The Bible trembled in Cole's hands. The pages began to blacken at the edges, curling like paper held too close to fire. Your words can't save you, Samuel whispered. No one's words ever could. The wind screamed. The oak's branches shook violently though no storm had come. Cole dropped to his knees, shouting prayers that were torn away by the noise. His lantern shattered, and the firelight danced across the field, brief, bright, and gone. When morning came, the people found his horse wandering near the road, saddle torn, eyes wide with fear. They searched the plantation for 2 days before finding the preacher's Bible at the foot of the tree, its pages burned to ash except for one. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. No one ever found Reverend Cole. That same summer, families began to leave the area. Fields that once fed dozens lay empty. The land around the Stokes plantation grew strange. Animals wouldn't cross it, and travelers swore they saw a figure walking the rows at dusk, his shadow long and patient. Dr. Whitfield, the same doctor who'd written the first death reports years ago, returned one last time to study what remained. In his journal, he wrote, "The earth feels restless here. It's as if it remembers everything done upon it." He never returned to practice after that visit. He burned his notes, closed his office, and moved north. And so the legend of Samuel Kincaid settled deeper into the soil. Some said he was a spirit of vengeance, others said a curse born of cruelty. But the old ones whispered something different, that he was neither. They said Samuel Kincaid was justice itself. The kind of justice that crawls out of shallow graves and waits for the living to remember what they've done. End of part 6. Call to action. If this story made your skin crawl, hit like, share, and subscribe for part 7, where the haunting spreads beyond the plantation, and those who profited from Samuel's suffering learn that some debts never stop collecting. Would you like me to continue with part 7 in the same tone and pacing, 1000 words, historic horror, simple and cinematic? Hook. There's a reason old folks say, don't dig up what the earth's already claimed. But greed has a way of deafening men to wisdom. After Reverend Cole vanished, the Stokes plantation sat untouched for years, until the railroad came. When men with hammers and gold fever tried to tame that haunted ground, they found out that the land wasn't done with its story. The curse of Samuel Kincaid was waking again, and this time, it wanted more than revenge. Part 7. The Railroad and the Restless Dead. In the summer of 1892, the Texas Central Railroad sent a crew of 30 men to cut a new line straight through the abandoned Stokes property. It was the quickest route, flat land, easy soil, and only one obstacle, a forgotten plantation overgrown with vines and thorns. The foreman, William Hargrove, didn't care about ghost stories. He cared about deadlines and paychecks. "We'll clear it in a week," he told his men, spitting tobacco onto the dry ground. "Ain't no spirit gonna stop progress." The men laughed, but the locals didn't. Old women crossed themselves when they saw the surveyors heading toward the fields. The preacher at the nearby chapel refused to bless the worksite. "You're walking on cursed land," he warned. "That soil remembers blood." Hargrove waved him off. "So does every piece of this country," he said. The first day was easy. The men chopped down the tall weeds and pulled up the old fence posts. Someone found a rusted horseshoe near the oak tree and nailed it to a beam for luck. They joked about ghosts and drank cheap whiskey by the fire. That night, the wind changed. It started as a low hum through the branches, soft at first, like distant singing. Then the ground began to tremble, just enough to make the tools rattle. One of the men, a boy named Carter, thought he heard someone calling his name from the dark. When he went to check, he saw nothing but empty fields and the twisted shape of the old oak against the moon. The next morning, Hargrove found Carter's boots by the fence. The boy was gone. "Ran off," Hargrove said, though his voice wasn't steady. He was spooked. They kept working. By noon, 2 more men disappeared. One was last seen near the tree, the other near the old slave quarters. The rest started whispering, about voices, about shadows moving through the tall grass, about the feeling that someone was always standing behind them. That night, no one sang. The campfire burned low as Hargrove sat apart, writing in his logbook by lantern light. He heard something behind him, soft footsteps in the dirt. "That, you, Carter," he called without looking up. Silence. Then a whisper, right behind his ear, "You shouldn't be here." He spun around. No one. The lantern flickered, and then he saw them. In the distance, between the trees, dozens of faint figures stood watching, men and women, their faces pale and still, clothes torn and faded. They didn't move. They didn't speak. But their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, like dying embers. Hargrove shouted for his crew. The men came running, armed with shovels and pistols, but by the time they reached him, the figures had vanished. Only the wind moved through the grass. The next morning, the ground crew found their rail stakes uprooted and piled neatly in the shape of a cross. "Someone's playing tricks," one man muttered. But when they tried to drive the new stakes, the earth refused to hold. Every hole filled itself as fast as they dug it, like the soil was pushing them out. By the 4th day, the men refused to work. "This place ain't right," said Johnson, the oldest of the crew. "The ground's cursed. It don't want us here." Hargrove cursed and threw his hat down. "Cursed, my foot. You all are scared of shadows." That night, a storm rolled in from the east, black clouds swallowing the moon. The thunder came like cannon fire, shaking the trees. The men huddled in their tents as lightning split the sky. Then came the smell, wet earth, iron, and rot. The storm didn't just bring rain. It brought whispers. Voices rose with the wind, calling out from the field. Some were crying, others were laughing, low, hollow laughter that didn't sound human. And through it all came a single voice, calm and deep. "You can't build over what you buried." Hargrove burst from his tent, soaked and trembling. "Who's there?" he shouted into the storm. The thunder answered. When lightning flashed again, he saw the oak tree standing alone against the sky, and beneath it, a figure. Tall, still, waiting. Samuel Kincaid. His face was the same as in the old daguerreotype Hargrove had seen in the county archives, sharp eyes, strong jaw, but hollow now, like the flesh was borrowed. "You've had your time," Hargrove said, voice breaking. "The world's moving on." Samuel didn't move. The wind tore at his coat, revealing the faint marks of a rope around his neck. "The world don't move," Samuel said. "It circles back." Then he raised his hand, and the ground split open. The men screamed as the earth cracked beneath them, swallowing tents, tools, and track. The air filled with the sound of rushing wind and the cries of the dead. Figures rose from the soil, hands, faces, bodies, reaching, grabbing, pulling. Hargrove tried to run, but the mud clung to his boots. He stumbled, fell, and felt fingers wrap around his ankle, cold as stone, strong as steel. The last thing he saw before he went under was Samuel's face, calm and unblinking. When the storm passed, the railroad company sent a recovery team. They found the site completely untouched. No rails, no tents, no sign of struggle. Just the old oak tree and a single lantern burning at its base. The report filed 2 weeks later read, "Construction suspended due to ground instability." But the locals knew better. They said the land took back what it was owed. Years later, when the railroad finally went through a different route, the engineers marked that area on their maps with one word, "forbidden." Travelers passing through at night sometimes swear they see lights in the fields, small lanterns swaying in the dark, as if ghostly workers are still laying track for a train that will never come. And when the wind blows just right, you can hear a voice whisper, "Keep moving. Don't stop here." Because those who stop might just find the earth waiting to remember them too. End of Part 7. Call to action. If you're still brave enough to follow this story, hit like, share, and subscribe for Part 8, where a wealthy northern historian returns to the South to uncover the truth behind the curse, and learns that history doesn't like being rewritten. Would you like me to continue with part 8 in the same dark, cinematic tone? Hook. Some stories refuse to stay buried. They whisper from the cracks of forgotten ledgers and flicker through candle flames when the night grows still. Nearly 40 years after the railroad disaster, a northern historian named Jonathan Hale arrived in Texas with one goal: to uncover the truth behind the curse of Samuel Kincaid. But what Hale didn't know was that history has its own way of defending itself. Some ghosts don't like to be studied. Part 8. The Historian Who Dug Too Deep. In the spring of 1898, Jonathan Hale stepped off the train in Jefferson, Texas, his boots crunching on the red dirt road. He carried a leather satchel full of notebooks, a camera, and an ambition that had made him famous at Harvard. Hale specialized in unexplained historical phenomena, tales most scholars dismissed as superstition. But the legend of Samuel Kincaid was different. It had real names, real dates, and a trail of verified deaths that stretched back half a century. Hale's letters to local officials were polite but firm. He wanted access to the county records, church archives, and any surviving plantation maps. The clerks gave him wary glances. One old man at the courthouse shook his head. "You're chasing death, Professor," he said. "That story don't end well for no one who looks too close." Hale smiled. Stories never end well for the ones who write them down first. He rented a room at the Jefferson boarding house, unpacked his typewriter, and began interviewing locals. Most refused to speak, but an elderly preacher named Reverend Thomas agreed to talk, under one condition. They would meet after sunset, at the edge of the abandoned Stokes plantation. The preacher arrived carrying a Bible so worn it looked ready to crumble. He wouldn't step past the old fence line. "This land was cursed by sorrow," he said. "Men built fortunes here on suffering. You start poking at that, and the ground remembers." Hale took notes eagerly. "Do you believe in curses, Reverend?" "I believe in justice," the old man said. "And sometimes justice needs a darker hand." The conversation ended when the wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of singing, low and mournful, drifting from deep inside the overgrown fields. Hale turned toward the sound, heart racing. When he looked back, the Reverend was already gone. The next morning, Hale began exploring the plantation ruins. The house was long gone, only its stone foundation and a few charred beams remaining. The air smelled faintly of iron. In the barn's shadow, he found an old wooden sign buried halfway in the soil. The words were faded, but he could still read the name burned into the wood: Samuel Kincaid. That night, Hale developed his photographs in the boarding house darkroom. One image, taken near the oak tree, came out wrong. A figure stood in the frame, tall, blurred, watching. It wasn't there when he'd taken the shot. He checked the negative twice. The figure was real. By the third day, Hale couldn't sleep. He kept hearing whispers outside his window, like voices speaking in a language older than English. He wrote in his journal that he felt a constant presence, as though the past itself were following me. Determined to find proof, Hale returned to the plantation after midnight with a lantern and a camera. The moon was low and red, and the wind carried the smell of rain. He set up his camera near the oak tree and waited. Minutes turned to hours. Then came the footsteps, soft, measured, coming from behind. Hale turned, his lantern trembling in his hand. A man stood at the edge of the clearing. Tall, broad-shouldered, his clothes tattered and gray, like the earth had given them back. His eyes were deep and calm. "Samuel Kincaid," Hale whispered. The figure didn't move. "I came to tell your story," Hale said. "To make the truth known. To free your name." Samuel stepped forward, the ground beneath his feet stirring as though it breathed. His voice was low, steady, heavy with time. "You can't free what was never bound." Hale took a shaky step back. "You were wronged. I want to show the world." Samuel raised a hand, and the wind roared through the trees. "The world already knows," he said. "They just don't care." Hale's lantern blew out. Darkness swallowed the clearing. He felt something cold touch his shoulder, a hand, solid as stone. Then everything went black. He woke at dawn lying in the field, his camera smashed, his clothes damp with dew. The sun was rising over the horizon, but the air was wrong, too still, too heavy. He gathered what he could and stumbled back to town. At the boarding house, he found that his notes were gone. Every page, every photograph, every trace of his work had vanished. Only one sheet of paper remained on his desk. It was blank except for a single sentence written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. The story tells itself. 3 days later, the local sheriff found Hale's body floating in the river, eyes wide open, hands still clutching his satchel. Inside were his notebooks, soaked, ink washed away. The coroner ruled it accidental drowning. The preacher called it justice. But that wasn't the end. Months later, a professor at Harvard received a package with no return address. Inside were 3 photographs, grainy, water-damaged, but one image was unmistakable. It showed a man standing under a tree, looking directly at the camera. His expression was calm, almost sad. On the back, someone had written 2 words in faded ink, "Still here." For decades after, students at the university whispered about the Hale collection, a locked drawer in the archives that no one was supposed to open. Some said the photographs inside changed over time. Some said the figure in them moved closer each year. Even now, travelers passing through Jefferson at night sometimes claim to see a man standing near the tracks that never got finished. He doesn't move, he doesn't speak, but if you stop long enough to look, you might see his eyes, old, watching, waiting. And if you listen closely, you'll hear the faint click of a camera shutter, capturing a story that refuses to die. End of Part 8. Call to action. If this story gave you chills, hit like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss Part 9, where a group of paranormal investigators enters the ruins to document the truth, and find out that some hauntings aren't meant to be filmed. Would you like me to continue with Part 9 in the same eerie, cinematic storytelling style? Hook. They came with flashlights, cameras, and confidence, modern explorers chasing ghosts of a forgotten past. But when the cameras stopped recording, what they found wasn't history. It was hunger, a hunger that had been waiting for them beneath the roots of an old Texas oak. Part 9. The Ghost Hunters of Jefferson County. In October 2023, a group of paranormal investigators called Southern Shadows arrived in Jefferson, Texas. They specialized in filming haunted locations across the South, and their channel had nearly 1 million subscribers. Their next target was the infamous Stokes Plantation, rumored to be home to the curse of Samuel Kincaid. The team consisted of 5 members. Evan, the host and self-proclaimed skeptic. Maria, the researcher who'd uncovered Drive, Whitfield's old journals. Derek, the cameraman with nerves of steel. Jordan, the tech expert who believed ghosts could be measured by EMF meters. And Lexi, the medium who said she could feel the pain of the dead. They set up camp near the ruins just before sunset. The air was heavy with the smell of pine and river water. Even in daylight, the place felt wrong. The old foundation stones were overgrown with moss, and the oak tree at the center of the property leaned like it was tired of standing guard. Maria told the story as the cameras rolled. "This is where Samuel Kincaid was last seen," she said. "Every owner of this land between 1848 and 1851 died mysteriously. Locals said Samuel brought death wherever he went. Others claimed he never died at all." Evan chuckled for the camera. "So tonight, we're going to find out if Samuel Kincaid still walks these fields." They didn't realize how true that would be. By nightfall, they'd set up motion sensors, static cameras, and a spirit box to record potential voices. The devices flickered with green lights. The air grew colder. The sound of crickets faded until only silence remained. At 9:47 p.m., the first anomaly appeared. Jordan's EMF detector spiked off the charts near the oak tree. "We've got a reading," he whispered, excitement cutting through the tension. "Something's here." Evan approached the tree, holding the spirit box. Static filled the night, followed by a faint male voice, calm, steady, unmistakable. "You shouldn't be here." The group froze. Lexi's face went pale. "It's him," she whispered. "It's Samuel. Ask him something," Evan said, keeping his voice steady for the camera. Maria swallowed hard. "Samuel, do you know you're dead?" A pause. Then, softly through the static, "Do you?" Lexi gasped. The spirit box went silent. A sudden wind tore through the clearing, knocking over a camera tripod. Derek cursed, grabbing his equipment. "We're losing battery fast," he said. Every screen flickered, the power draining like something was feeding on it. Evan tried to laugh it off. "It's just interference. Happens all the time." But his voice shook. Then the ground began to tremble. At first it was subtle, like distant thunder. Then the earth near the oak cracked open just enough for the smell to escape, something old, metallic, like rust and blood. Lexi doubled over, clutching her stomach. "He's angry," she cried. "He's been buried under lies." The cameras kept recording. The footage would later show that at exactly 10:02 p.m., a shadow rose behind Lexi. It wasn't cast by the light. It stood taller than any man, shaped like someone wearing chains across his shoulders. Maria screamed. Derek turned the camera toward the shadow, capturing the moment before it vanished. The air snapped like static electricity, and Lexi fell to the ground, unconscious. Evan dragged her away while shouting, "We're done. Everyone back to the cars." But when they reached the path, the forest didn't look the same. The trail twisted in circles. The oak tree was always behind them, no matter which way they turned. Jordan checked the GPS. "This doesn't make sense. We're walking straight but not moving." The static voice returned, louder this time, not from the spirit box but from the air itself. "You come to watch," it said. "You come to record, but you never listen." Evan yelled into the dark. "What do you want?" A whisper replied, carried on the wind. "To be remembered." Suddenly, the lights of the equipment flashed all at once, and everything went black. The next thing Maria remembered was waking up in the middle of the field at dawn, dew on her clothes, her throat dry. The cameras were gone. The rest of the team was scattered, dazed, unable to recall how they'd gotten there. Derek's camera was found a week later, washed up along the banks of the Cypress Bayou, 20 miles away. The footage was damaged but partially recoverable. In the final minutes of the recording, the camera panned shakily across the clearing. The oak tree stood in the distance. And under it, a figure, tall, still, watching. Evan's voice was faint but clear. "Who are you?" The figure stepped forward. "You already know my name." The camera dropped. Static filled the screen. Then a single image flashed before the recording ended, 5 shadows hanging from the branches of the old oak, swaying in the wind. The video was uploaded to Southern Shadow's YouTube channel automatically by a preset schedule. It went viral within hours, but the comments were disabled. When police arrived at the plantation to investigate, the team was gone. Their equipment was found piled neatly beneath the oak tree. Only one object was missing, Evan's microphone. 2 months later, a new video appeared on the same channel, though the account had been inactive since the disappearance. It showed a single static shot of the oak tree at night. In the distance, a voice whispered, "The story tells itself." Then the screen faded to black. End of part 9. Call to action. If this episode left you breathless, hit like, share, and subscribe, because in part 10, the final chapter, we return to where it all began. The land will speak, the dead will rise, and the truth about Samuel Kincaid will finally be revealed. Would you like me to begin writing part 10, final part, next in the same cinematic and chilling tone? Hook. Every story needs an ending. But some endings aren't written, they're earned, one scream, one heartbeat, one secret at a time. The curse of Samuel Kincaid began with blood, grew in silence, and now demands truth. Tonight, we return to the place where it all started, the land that remembers. The land that never forgets. Part 10. The Final Reckoning. A year after the disappearance of the Southern Shadows team, Jefferson County was quiet again. The plantation ruins had been fenced off, labeled as private property, and the locals avoided the place entirely. But not everyone stayed away. In February 2024, a young journalist named Claire Monroe arrived from Dallas. She was working on a feature for the American Review called, Ghosts of the South, When History Refuses to Die. Her editor told her not to chase myths, but Claire wasn't here for ghost stories, she wanted the truth behind Samuel Kincaid. She'd watched the viral video from the Southern Shadows channel more times than she could count. There was something in that footage, something the internet couldn't explain, a figure that seemed too solid to be smoke, too aware to be illusion. Claire set up camp near the site with a drone, a recorder, and an old map she'd found in the archives at Marshall. She'd done her research. She knew the names of every plantation owner who'd died after buying Samuel Kincaid. She knew about Dr. Whitfield's journals. And she knew about the historian, Jonathan Hale, whose body had been found in the river over a century ago. When she reached the clearing, the air was unnaturally still. The old oak tree stood tall, blackened by time, its roots curling like veins through the soil. Beneath it, she noticed something half buried in the dirt, a rusted nameplate. She brushed it off gently. The letters were faint, but she could read them. Samuel Kincaid. Claire sat in the grass, recorder on, camera rolling. "If you can hear me," she said softly, "I'm not here to exploit you. I want to understand. What happened to you?" For a long moment, there was only the sound of wind through the leaves. Then the temperature dropped. Her breath came out white. And from somewhere behind her came the sound of slow footsteps. She turned. No one was there. The voice came next, low, calm, and close. "Understanding doesn't change the past." Her pulse quickened. "Samuel." The air shimmered, and a figure began to take form. He was tall, his features etched with strength and sorrow. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired, like he'd been waiting too long to be heard. "You all come here," he said. "You ask questions, but you don't listen. You dig for bones, but not for truth." "I want to listen," Claire whispered. "Please tell me." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "It started with pain. They broke everything, body, mind, soul. I didn't curse them, miss. I just stopped forgiving. Every lash, every order, every name they called us built something. You can only bury so much sorrow before the ground starts to breathe." Claire trembled. "So, you didn't kill them?" "I didn't have to," Samuel said. "The land did. It remembered every scream, every drop of blood. When the wind carried their prayers, the earth carried our rage." He looked up at the sky, where lightning flickered beyond the clouds. "I asked God once to make it stop. But he was quiet, so the land answered instead." Claire's camera flickered. Static rolled across the lens. Her voice quivered as she asked, "And the others? The people who came after? They disturbed what was already sleeping." Every question wakes something. Every truth has a cost. The oak behind him groaned like an old door opening. Its bark cracked, revealing faint shapes that looked like faces, anguished, watching. Samuel stepped closer. "You're not like the others. You came to listen, so I'll tell you what they all forgot." He reached out his hand, not touching her, but close enough that she felt warmth, alive, human. "Tell them my name. Tell them we were more than chains and labor. Tell them we were people who wanted peace." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "I will. I promise." Samuel gave a faint smile. "Then my story is done." The wind rose, swirling leaves around them like a storm of whispers. The oak tree's branches stretched upward as though exhaling centuries of pain. The air shimmered one last time, and Samuel's figure faded into light. When it was over, the silence was different, gentler, as if something heavy had finally lifted. Claire packed her things, her hands shaking. As she turned to leave, she noticed her camera light still blinking. It had recorded everything. Back in Dallas, Claire uploaded the footage. The video showed her speaking alone in the field, no voice, no figure, no wind. But in the final seconds, as she whispered, "I promise," a shadow passed behind her, pausing beneath the oak tree. Then the words appeared across the screen in faint white letters. "The story tells itself." The video spread across the internet within days. Some called it fake, others swore they could see Samuel's face in the light. But what mattered most wasn't the footage, it was what came after. The site of the old plantation was finally recognized as a historical landmark. A memorial plaque was placed at the oak tree, inscribed with the names of those who lived and died there, enslaved and forgotten. And under those names, one final line was added, carved into stone. "He walked in chains, but his story walks free." Locals say that on quiet nights, when the wind moves through the trees, you can still hear the faint hum of a man singing an old working song. Not angry, not sorrowful, just free. Maybe Samuel Kincaid never wanted vengeance. Maybe he just wanted to be remembered. End of part 10. Final part. Call to action. If this ending sent chills down your spine, hit like, share, and subscribe to keep this haunting legacy alive. Leave a comment below. What do you think happened to Samuel Kincaid? Was it a curse, or was it justice finally finding its voice?